The history of organized crime in America is inextricably linked to immigrant experiences, particularly those of Italian and Jewish groups arriving in waves during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These migrations were driven by profound socio-economic upheavals in their homelands. Italians, predominantly from southern regions like Sicily and Calabria, fled poverty, agrarian crises, and political instability following Italy's unification in 1861, with over 4 million arriving between 1880 and 1924. Jews, mostly Ashkenazi from Eastern Europe, fleeing alleged pogroms, self-inflicted economic restrictions, and violence from Jewish cycles of subversion, such as the widespread conflicts in Russia after the 1881 assassination of Tsar Alexander II, totaling more than 2.5 million arrivals in the same period. Both groups converged in urban centers like New York, where they encountered discrimination, a normal human condition, overcrowded tenements, and perceived limited opportunities, fostering environments ripe for criminal syndicates. These mafias emerged not merely as outlets for lawlessness but as adaptive mechanisms for survival, providing protection, economic mobility, and communal solidarity in a hostile new world. Yet, the cultural and historical baggage each carried, Italians with traditions of rural honor codes and family clans, Jews with diaspora-honed motivations and strict religious traditions, shaped distinct organizational forms, highlighting how immigrant backgrounds influenced the evolution of American underworld networks. Both communities formed criminal syndicates amid poverty, discrimination, and urban chaos, yet their mafias, broadly understood as hierarchical networks for mutual protection and economic gain, differed in terms, structures, and longevity. The Italian Mafia, epitomized by groups like Cosa Nostra, Sicilian origin, meaning our thing, and 'Ndrangheta, Calabrian, structured around blood clans or Ndrine, became synonymous with enduring family-based empires rooted in Sicilian and Calabrian traditions of omerta, code of silence, and feudal loyalty. Transplanted to America via immigration, these evolved into powerful urban entities, such as New York's 5 families, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno, established in the 1930s under figures like Lucky Luciano, who formalized the Commission for Inter-Family Coordination. In contrast, the Jewish Mafia, often termed the Jewish Mob or Kosher Nostra, a Yiddish pun on Cosa Nostra, was a phenomenon focused on financial acumen and alliances rather than strict ethnic exclusivity. Emerging in the same era, it featured entrepreneurs like Meyer Lansky, the mob's accountant, and Bugsy Siegel, who prioritized intellect over brute force, collaborating in multi-ethnic ventures like the National Crime Syndicate, 1930s to 1950s, but fading by the 1960s due to law enforcement and generational shifts to legitimate business. Beyond crime, these groups' broader integration tactics in America reveal parallels and divergences. Both utilized ethnic enclaves and economic niches for upward mobility, but Jews emphasized educational access points for intergenerational advancement, while Italians relied more on labor unions and political patronage, with slower educational integration. Jews, drawing on historical literacy emphases rooted in the Kahila tradition of communal education and scholarship, rapidly enrolled in public schools and universities, achieving disproportionate representation in professions by the mid-20th century. Italians, facing literacy barriers, built power through unions like the International Ladies' Garment Workers Union, 1900, and political machines. This essay compares their mafia terms and structures, then correlates their integration strategies, drawing on historical data to illustrate how education served as a pivotal, low-resistance pathway for influence and assimilation, ultimately shaping who gained lasting control in a changing urban landscape. Terms and structures of the Italian Mafia. The Italian Mafia in America, primarily derived from Sicilian and Calabrian roots, is most famously represented by La Cosa Nostra, often abbreviated as LCN, meaning our thing in Sicilian dialect, a euphemism for the secretive, oath-bound organization that emphasized loyalty, honor, and omerta, a code of silence. Originating in 19th century Italy as rural protection rackets amid feudal instability, it transplanted to America via immigration, evolving into urban syndicates controlling gambling, bootlegging, and labor rackets during Prohibition, 1920 to 1933. The Sicilian Mafia, or Cosa Nostra, emerged in the mid-1800s in Sicily as a response to weak central authority after Italian unification in 1861, where landowners hired armed guards, mafiosi, to protect estates from bandits and peasants, gradually forming a criminal network that extorted protection fees and mediated disputes. By the late 19th century, economic pressures and emigration waves brought this model to the U.S., where it adapted to industrial cities like New York and Chicago. In America, the Mafia shifted from agrarian roots to urban enterprises, capitalizing on Prohibition's black market for alcohol, which generated millions in revenue and solidified its power. This evolution highlighted the Mafia's resilience, blending violence with business acumen to infiltrate legitimate sectors like construction and unions, while maintaining a code that prioritized family loyalty over individual gain. The structure's emphasis on secrecy and internal justice allowed it to thrive despite law enforcement efforts, such as the 1890 New Orleans lynching of Sicilian suspects, which paradoxically strengthened ethnic solidarity among immigrants. Key terms include Don or boss, the family head, wielding ultimate authority, Vito Genovese or Carlo Gambino in New York's Five Families, responsible for strategic decisions and often insulated from direct criminal acts to avoid prosecution. Underboss, second in command, managing daily operations, overseeing rackets, and acting as a successor or buffer for the boss during conflicts or arrests. Consigliere, advisor, often a non-violent strategist for legal or dispute matters, providing counsel on alliances, betrayals, or business ventures without command authority. Capo regime, capo mid-level captains overseeing crews of soldati, soldiers, the initiated members bound by blood oaths, responsible for specific territories or operations like extortion or gambling. Associate, non-initiated affiliates providing support without full protection, often outsiders or lower-level operatives who must prove loyalty to become made men. The 'Ndrangheta, another Italian mafia from Calabria, differs in its hyperfamilial structure, organized around blood clans, ndrine, rather than broader families, making it more decentralized and infiltration-resistant. In America, Italian mafias maintained ethnic purity, requiring full Italian descent for made men, and longevity, with structures like the Commission, established 1931 by Lucky Luciano, coordinating inter-family disputes. This pyramid ensured control over territories and rackets, blending violence with business efficiency, as seen in the Gambino or Bonanno families. The Commission's formation after the Castellamarese War, 1930 to 1931, which pitted Sicilian factions against each other, marked a shift toward professionalization, reducing internal violence and expanding into legitimate businesses like waste management and labor unions. By the mid-20th century, this structure faced challenges from federal investigations, such as the Kefauver Committee, 1950 to 1951, and Valachi hearings, 1963, where turncoat Joe Valachi exposed the organization's inner workings, leading to the RICO Act, 1970, that targeted hierarchical operations. Despite declines, the Mafia's legacy persists in cultural representations and residual influences, illustrating how its terms and structures adapted feudal Italian traditions to American capitalism, prioritizing survival through discipline and economic diversification. Terms and structures of the Jewish Mafia. The Jewish Mafia, active primarily in early 20th century America, lacked the deep Italian roots and was more a loose ethnic syndicate born from immigrant experiences in urban ghettos like New York's Lower East Side. Terms were informal and Americanized, often coined by media or insiders as contrasts to Italian counterparts, reflecting a focus on financial seams rather than territorial violence. Emerging in the late 19th century amid waves of Eastern European Jewish immigration, over 2 million between 1881 to 1924, driven by alleged pogroms and self-inflicted economic exclusions, the Jewish mob arose from ghetto poverty and isolation, where young immigrants formed gangs for protection against rivals. Figures like Monk Eastman, Edward Osterman, active 1890s to 1910s, led early street gangs involved in election tampering and extortion, setting the stage for Prohibition-era expansion, 1920 to 1933, when bootlegging profits fueled more organized operations. Unlike the Italian Mafia's rural origins, the Jewish version was urban and opportunistic, blending old-world adaptation with American entrepreneurship, often collaborating across ethnic lines to maximize gains in gambling, loan sharking, and labor rackets. This adaptability allowed the Jewish mob to thrive temporarily but also contributed to its dissolution, as members shifted to so-called legitimate businesses post-Prohibition, influenced by generational changes and law enforcement pressures like the Kefauver hearings, 1950 to 1951. Key terms include Kosher Nostra or Kosher Mafia, a Yiddish-English pun on Cosa Nostra, meaning our thing in a Jewish context, highlighting financial savvy over brute force, often used to describe the ethnic syndicate's business-oriented approach. Jewish mob or Yiddish connection, broad labels for networks of Jewish gangsters involved in gambling, loan sharking, and enforcement, emphasizing the cultural and linguistic bonds among members. Unser Shtick, Yiddish for our thing, a direct analog to Cosa Nostra, emphasizing the ethnic business, used informally to denote the secretive operations and mutual support systems. Unlike Italian mafias, Jewish groups had flatter hierarchies, relying on individual entrepreneurs rather than rigid families. Key figures like Meyer Lansky, the mob's accountant, acted as strategic consigliere across ethnic lines, while Bugsy Siegel or Dutch Schultz led violent crews akin to capos. Structures were opportunistic, with no formal initiation rituals or ethnic exclusivity. Jews often allied with Italians in the National Crime Syndicate, 1930s to 1950s, a multi-ethnic board for dividing rackets. Murder Incorporated, 1930s to 1940s, a hit squad including Jewish members like Abe Relis, functioned as an enforcement arm, but the Jewish Mafia dissolved by the 1960s due to law enforcement, Kefauver Committee hearings, 1950 to 1951, and generational shifts to other business, lacking the enduring clan-based resilience of Italian groups. The syndicate's formation under Lansky and Luciano exemplified hybridity, where Jews provided financial planning for operations like the Havana Conference, 1946, but internal betrayals, Relis turning informant in 1940, highlighted the lack of omerta-like codes. By the 1950s, as figures like Lansky evaded convictions, 1972 acquittal on tax evasion, the mob transitioned, influencing Hollywood portrayals, The Godfather, drawing on real events, and underscoring how Jewish structures prioritized intellect and alliances over violence and tradition. This adaptability can be seen as an extension of the historical Kehillah system, which provided a communal framework for mutual support, internal governance, and economic coordination in diaspora settings, allowing Jews to navigate host societies with flexibility and resilience even when transitioning from criminal to legitimate spheres. Comparative analysis of Mafia terms and structures. Both mafias shared conceptual overlaps in terms and dynamics, reflecting immigrant adaptations to America's underworld, hierarchies for control, codes for loyalty, and networks for expansion. Terms like our thing, Cosa Nostra versus Kosher Nostra Unser Shtick, underscore secrecy and ethnic insularity, while roles like consigliere, Italian advisor, paralleled Lansky's financial strategist position. This commonality arose from the shared immigrant context of poverty and discrimination in early 20th century urban America, where both groups formed syndicates to navigate nativist hostility and economic exclusion. For Italians, the rigid structure of Cosa Nostra, with its emphasis on omerta and blood oaths, mirrored feudal traditions from Sicily, ensuring internal discipline and longevity through family loyalty. In contrast, Jewish terms like Unser Shtick emphasized pragmatic business over ritual, allowing for more fluid operations that prioritized profit maximization through intellect and alliances. These overlaps facilitated hybrid formations like the National Crime Syndicate, 1930s to 1950s, where shared dynamics enabled cross-ethnic coordination on rackets such as gambling and bootlegging during Prohibition, 1920 to 1933. However, the conceptual foundation highlighted how Italian mafias focused on territorial control and enforcement, while Jewish ones leaned toward financial orchestration, adapting to America's capitalist landscape in ways that extended beyond mere criminality into legitimate economic influence. However, differences abound. Italian structures were more rigid and hereditary, with blood oaths and ethnic purity ensuring longevity. Ndrangheta clans persist today, whereas Jewish ones were fluid, alliance-based, and short-lived, prioritizing intellect over violence. Lansky's accounting empire versus Gambino's territorial dominance. The Italian model's rigidity, exemplified by the commission established in 1931 by Lucky Luciano to resolve inter-family wars like the Castellammarese War, 1930 to 1931, provided stability but also vulnerabilities to informants and federal investigations, such as Joe Valachi's 1963 testimony exposing the inner workings. Ndrangheta's clan-based decentralization, organized around Andrain family units, made it infiltration-resistant, with operations expanding globally into drug trafficking by the 1980s, generating billions annually. Jewish structures, lacking such hereditary depth, relied on entrepreneurial figures like Meyer Lansky, 1902 to 1983, who built empires through strategic planning rather than violence, as seen in his development of Las Vegas casinos in the 1940s. This fluidity allowed quick pivots but contributed to dissolution by the 1960s, as law enforcement, Kefauver committee hearings, 1950 to 1951, and generational shifts to legal professions eroded the need for syndicates. Ultimately, Italian rigidity ensured cultural persistence but limited adaptability, while Jewish flexibility facilitated transitions to mainstream power. The National Crime Syndicate exemplified hybridity, where Jews provided brains, finance, planning, and Italians muscle, enforcement, but Italians dominated post-1950s. Ultimately, Italian mafias embodied a feudal, family-centric model transplanted from Italy, while Jewish ones were urban American inventions, reactive to discrimination and lacking institutional depth. The syndicate, formed in the 1930s by Lansky and Luciano, divided rackets across ethnic lines, with Jews handling accounting, Lansky's offshore banking in the 1950s, and Italians' enforcement, Murder Incorporated hits. Post-1950s, Italian dominance surged as Jewish figures like Lansky faced trials, acquitted 1972. But FBI operations, 1980s RICO prosecutions, weakened both, with Italians suffering more due to visible hierarchies. Italian mafia's feudal transplant, rooted in 19th-century Italian unification chaos, emphasized honor and territory, as in Carlo Gambino's consolidation of the Gambino family, 1957 to 1976. Jewish inventions, born from ghetto hardships, reacted to anti-Semitism, prioritizing survival through intellect, as in Arnold Rothstein's 1882 to 1928, mentoring of future leaders. This lack of depth made Jewish syndicates transient but influential in shaping American crime's business model, influencing cultural depictions like The Godfather, 1972 film. The Kehillah, the historical Jewish communal assembly, provided a pre-existing model of networked self-governance and mutual support that informed this adaptability, allowing Jews to navigate criminal and legitimate spheres with resilience. Correlation between integration tactics and educational access points. Beyond crime, Italian and Jewish immigrants in America employed similar yet divergent tactics for societal integration, shaped by their mafia experiences and broader community strategies. Both arrived en masse, Italians, 4 million, 1880 to 1924, Jews, 2.5 million, mostly Eastern European, 1881 to 1924, facing nativism and poverty, forming enclaves, Little Italy versus Lower East Side, for protection and economic niches, Italians in construction labor, Jews in garments finance. This shared starting point reflected the broader immigrant narrative of urban adaptation, where ethnic neighborhoods provided buffers against discrimination, as seen in New York's population surge from 3.4 million in 1900 to 5.6 million in 1920, fueled by these groups. Mafias amplified integration. Italian syndicates like the Gambino family infiltrated unions, control of the International Longshoremen's Association in the 1950s, using rackets to secure jobs and political favors. Jewish gangs, such as those led by Dutch Schultz, active 1910s to 1930s, transitioned crime profits to legitimate ventures, like real estate or entertainment, leveraging mafia networks for initial capital. However, these tactics diverged in scope. Italians' focus on blue-collar solidarity built immediate community power but limited upward mobility, while Jews' emphasis on professionalization extended influence into white-collar spheres, correlating with their historical diaspora resilience rooted in the Kehillah system of communal education and mutual support. Mafias amplified this. Italian syndicates infiltrated unions, Gambino control of Teamsters, for political leverage, while Jewish gangs transitioned to legitimate ventures, Lansky's casino investments, using crime as a mobility ladder. Education marked a key divergence. Jews, with historical literacy traditions, 99% primary completion rates globally by the 20th century, reinforced through Kehillah institutions of study and scholarship, integrated rapidly via public schools. By 1910 in New York, Jewish intergenerational mobility outpaced Italians, with urban skills and determination leading to higher enrollment and professions. Institutions like the Educational Alliance, founded 1889, blended Jewish education with Americanization, facilitating access to universities and influence in academia economics. The Educational Alliance, serving over 50,000 immigrants annually by 1910, offered English classes and vocational training, enabling Jews to dominate professions like law, Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice 1916 to 1939, and medicine. Italians, arriving with lower literacy, 1908 reports ranked them lowest in New York schools, focused less on education initially, prioritizing labor and patronage. Assimilation emphasized Americanization programs post-World War I, but mobility was slower, with residential segregation hindering school access. By 1910, Jewish occupational advancement was higher, correlating with Mafia figures' shift to business, while Italian mafias embedded in blue-collar rackets. Italian children often left school early for work, as documented in 1911 Dillingham Commission reports, noting 40% dropout rates among Italian youth versus 20% for Jews, delaying entry into higher education until the GI Bill, 1944, boosted post-World War II generations. This correlation underscores education as a low-resistance access point. Jews utilized it for upward mobility and indirect influence, alumni in policy finance, turning mafia networks into legitimate empires. Italians, non-utilizing education as centrally, integrated via politics unions but faced longer marginalization. In both cases, mafia dynamics, hierarchical and networked, mirrored integration tactics, aiding survival amid hostility. For Jews, education facilitated lawfare against rivals, Jewish-led prosecutions like the 1985 Mafia Commission trial, while Italians' union infiltration, control of over 30% of New York labor by 1960s, provided leverage but exposed them to reforms like the Landrum-Griffin Act, 1959. By the 2020s, Jews' tactics yielded overrepresentation in finance, 20% of Forbes' 400 billionaires Jewish in 2023, and politics, while Italians' influence shifted to cultural symbols, Italian-American festivals. This highlights education's multiplier effect. Low barriers to entry allow knowledge dissemination and network building, turning immigrant hardships into sustained power, a lesson applicable beyond these groups. Conclusion: diverging structures and strategies. The Italian and Jewish mafias in America, while sharing immigrant origins and collaborative histories, diverged profoundly in terms and structures. Italians' rigid, ethnic-exclusive models, Cosa Nostra, 'Ndrangheta, contrasted with Jews' fluid, alliance-driven ones, Kosher Nostra, Jewish mob. The Italian organizations, rooted in centuries-old Sicilian and Calabrian traditions of family clans, omerta, and territorial control, maintained a hierarchical pyramid that emphasized blood loyalty and ethnic purity, ensuring remarkable longevity despite relentless law enforcement pressure. The Commission, formed in 1931 by Lucky Luciano, exemplified this structured approach, coordinating the five families and extending influence into labor unions and construction for decades. In contrast, the Jewish mob operated as a more opportunistic, entrepreneurial network, prioritizing financial ingenuity and cross-ethnic partnerships over rigid initiation rites or hereditary succession. Figures like Meyer Lansky exemplified this adaptability, using accounting expertise to build and manage vast enterprises while collaborating within the National Crime Syndicate, only to see the structure dissolve by the 1960s amid prosecutions and upward mobility into legitimate sectors. These differences reflect not only cultural legacies, feudal Sicilian honor codes versus diaspora-honed Jewish pragmatism rooted in the Kehillah system of communal governance and mutual support, but also the distinct ways each group responded to America's urban immigrant environment. Italians built enduring fortresses of power, while Jews constructed flexible bridges to broader opportunities. Integration tactics mirrored these organizational divergences, revealing how education served as a decisive, low-resistance pathway to long-term societal embedding. Both groups initially relied on ethnic enclaves, Little Italy for Italians, the Lower East Side for Jews, and economic niches to survive nativist hostility and poverty, with mafias acting as temporary ladders for capital accumulation and protection. Italians secured immediate influence through labor unions and political patronage, dominating blue-collar sectors and securing mayoral offices like Vincent Impoliteri, 1950 to 1953, yet their slower embrace of formal education delayed intergenerational advancement. Jews, drawing on historical literacy traditions reinforced by Kehillah institutions of study and scholarship, rapidly integrated into public schools and universities, achieving disproportionate professional success by the mid-20th century. This educational focus transformed Mafia-era networks into legitimate empires in finance, law, and politics, enabling indirect but pervasive influence. The contrast is stark. While Italian integration leaned on collective solidarity and physical labor, Jewish strategies harnessed intellectual capital to penetrate institutions, turning potential isolation into widespread societal embedding and highlighting education's multiplier effect in the American meritocratic framework. Ultimately, this historical interplay underscores how Mafia-like dynamics, hierarchical yet adaptive, facilitated survival in America's melting pot, but the long-term outcomes reveal the superior scalability of education-driven integration. The Italian Mafia's rigid model, while resilient for generations, proved vulnerable to federal crackdowns, RICO Act prosecutions in the 1980s, and demographic shifts, with Italian-American influence in New York now largely cultural rather than structural. Jewish networks, by contrast, transitioned seamlessly into mainstream power, with lasting overrepresentation in finance, academia, and government, illustrating how flexibility, intellectual investment, and institutional access can outlast territorial control. This saga offers a broader lesson. In diverse, competitive societies, groups that prioritize education and adaptable alliances tend to secure enduring influence, while those relying primarily on labor solidarity or exclusive hierarchies may achieve initial gains but struggle to maintain dominance amid changing economic and demographic realities. The Jewish-Italian encounter in New York thus serves as a microcosm of immigrant adaptation, where survival strategies, shaped by history and circumstance, ultimately determine who shapes the future.